All right, it is 9:32. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is the Durham City County Planning Committee, April 2nd. If we can get a roll call, please.
Chair Jacobs, excused. Vice Chair Baker.
Here.
Councilmember Caballero. Planning Commissioner Shigaris. Commissioner Lee. Mayor Pro Tem Middleton. Commissioner Valentine.
Here.
Commissioner Burton.
Here.
And Mayor Williams.
And I have not heard anything from Commissioner Lee or Councilmember Middleton, Mayor Pro Tem Middleton, so we'll just go ahead and see if they turn up.
Chair Baker, Vice Chair Baker, Lee told me he wasn't going to be here today, so.
Do we want to make a motion on excused absence?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? Ayes have it. Any announcements? Or, excuse me, adjustments to the agenda?
Sorry, I just, Mayor Pro Tem Middleton asked if he could also get an excused absence. I just saw this text. He is he's out on League of Municipalities business. Thank you.
Okay, any motions?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those against? All right, ayes have it. Any announcements? All right, approval of the minutes. Are there any comments, any adjustments? Can I entertain a motion?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those against? The minutes are approved for March 5th. City and county managers' priority items.
Good morning, Ava Miles with the City Attorney's Office. There are no priority items for the city today.
Curtis Massey from the County Attorney's Office. No priority items today.
Thank you. All right, then let's jump into the agenda. We're going to begin with the new UDO update, Module 2 engagement. Go ahead, Bo.
Morning, Vice Chair Baker, Committee, Bo Dobrinsky with the Planning Department. Give me just a second to get the right materials up. That's it. Thanks, Chris. All right. So this morning, we're going to continue along with the content for the new UDO. As we've discussed, our consultant Code Studio has provided broken out the new UDO draft into 4 modules. This is the remaining portions of the second module. We've shown you signs and transitions and screenings previously. The rest of the second module is development standards, general development standards that apply throughout the jurisdiction. Just as a reminder, the first module was the zoning districts and the standards that were specific to the districts themselves. So we'll get going, looking through the pedestrian and bicycle mobility standards. Just as a note, they're generally looking at the pedestrian access requirements and internal connectivity requirements. They're similar to the code today in terms of requiring walkways, which are essentially private sidewalks, along all access drives, with a few exceptions. But both sides for driveways used for access. And of course, connectivity throughout the development itself. The one distinction with the new UDO compared to the previous is introducing requirements for pedestrian access walkways to street-facing buildings. We have some similar requirements now in our design districts, but this will expand that significantly. There's three types. The first type required in the CX district, which is our suite of mixed-use districts, so downtown and in our transit opportunity place types. Type 1 requires more direct access, sidewalk. These are areas where we want to make pedestrian mobility most convenient, as it likely be a frequently used option. The second type, this is for most residential districts, multifamily or smaller scale commercial. This type of pedestrian access to the entrance is less direct, but it is required in a regular manner and has some consistent connections to the building entrances themselves. The third type, connection required, but there's quite a bit of flexibility. This is more for industrial uses, light and heavy, or other uses where it's more likely that a particular option is being used to get there. Keep going, Craig. Next section in this portion, bicycle parking. So similar to today's code, we'll continue to require bike parking, both short-term and long-term for most developments other than 1 and 2 single family. The short-term is required to be publicly accessible and located near the entrance. Another, keep going. Yeah, I'll do this. Thanks, Chris. One new component as a part of this draft is some requirements around transit. Currently, there's language that obviously at times requires consistency with adopted transit plans, but the new UDO will have specific requirements for what's required at these planned stops. We do need to work with both city and county transportation to ensure consistency in terms of what those requirements are. But this will be a new section in the code that doesn't exist today. In regards to vehicle access and parking, we have fairly minimal requirements as it relates to driveways on site. And so the new UDO draft will be introducing standards in regards to driveway widths, regularity, as well as how many driveways you may have. Currently, all those requirements, the majority of the requirements are within the reference guide for development for city development. And so the hope here is, one, just have some standardization around the driveways themselves that are constructed. I'll be honest, it's surprising to think that if it isn't next to a parking space, currently a driveway with for a commercial development has no standard. So this is, I'm a little excited about this section. The other fact is narrower driveways where appropriate and less spacing between them, with the idea of less suburban sprawl and other, it's making development larger and more spread out than necessary at times. And so we're working with our partner departments, both transportation and public works, as well as communicating with NCDOT to try and minimize conflicts and make sure that we're all on the same page. But you'll see as you look through this portion of the UDO draft that there's substantial narrowing at times. I'll pause here if anyone has any questions.
Yeah, sorry. go, I think it was access piece, not transit. I think it was sidewalk access. How are we, because one of the criticisms that I know around how we're doing some development nationally is, especially like transit opportunity areas, we're putting a lot of the windows and balconies in front on a main road, which is noise and all kinds of other pollution. And so there's a lot of conversation and design about flipping your buildings inward, creating those kind of inner courtyards, not having folks be, exposed to so much on it. Like if you go down in Chapel Hill, you see it on 15501. It's great that they have all that density, but you've got so many people just like right on the road. And so are we thinking about that? Like, I don't want us to, we put the thing in and then people are like, oh, look at all these buildings facing an ugly road, right? But that's because, again, like I say often, well, we're the ones who made the rules and they're just responding to the rules. So,
Sure. The standards in the current design district treat the sort of prioritize the aesthetics of the building and the access towards the public realm, right? The public right of way of the street. In the type 1 here, and so for the CX districts, that's certainly the way that it's currently drafted, right? Is now the one consideration that we have talked about this internally is how does that relate to the street typologies? And so to your point, it's not always appropriate to have, all of the windows and all of the balconies and all the access along a major thoroughfare, for example. And so that's something that we will certainly try and consider. The flip side of that, of course, is we don't want a bunch of internally focused communities that are ignoring, the public sidewalk if we're really trying to promote walkable neighborhoods. So.
And I would think that internationally, there's plenty of those examples. You have lots of cities that have inner courtyards and you don't actually have a lot of interaction with the sidewalk, and it's still very much a walkable, pedestrian-friendly space, right? So I just want us to be really careful about what we're setting up because, I know I would not want to live on a major, great, yes, density, and we have to be, historically, the US has not done great with these kinds of decisions. And so I want to, for doing all this work, that at least it allows for those options moving forward. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, I had a question about transit. I was having an interesting discussion with some students on last Friday. What's the decision that's made? How far that Go Durham goes out into the county? Like, for example, and maybe you can't answer this, but I'm thinking about like transit, walkability, things like that. Like, how far out does it go or does it stop? Like, the students were saying to me, it doesn't go, they live in Gorman, doesn't go out that far. Why doesn't it go out that far? They live out there. Why doesn't the bus, why aren't there sidewalks out there? Things like that. Is it because it's still considered county? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I obviously, ridership dictates that, but Sarah may have a better answer in terms of specific decisions.
Yeah, so I am not an expert in how our transit system is designed and operated, but I will say that I know that they do look at ridership potential. They are looking at expanding the system, but that's one of the things that I would have to defer to what's in the county transit plan to see where expansion is going to happen and when. So that's definitely some follow-up that we can do to connect you with that information.
Any last questions? Carry on. Thank you.
All right. One new component to this draft of the UDO compared to the current ordinance is a requirement for infrastructure for EV charging stations for a percentage of larger parking lots when parking is provided. simply just the electrical capacity and conduit, not necessarily the charger itself. So currently, this draft of UDO is not including any minimum parking requirement. This is consistent with the UDO. Currently, we do have parking maximums, which is also, we have that currently as well. They're no longer tier-based, of course, because we don't have tiers, but they are, to try and limit the amount of vast empty parking lots that we do see. I did want to, or we are seeking some direction from you all on this issue. We've been provided some feedback from the Transportation Department with some concerns about the lack of a parking requirement in situations where there's no on-street parking available, and potential issues that may arise if, there's development, units, specifically thinking residential, no parking available. Does that, the concern that would create parking violations that we then would have to address. I will say that since the text amendment that removed the parking requirements, we've seen really no change in the proposed amount of parking from developments, with the exception of a few small infill residential projects. So wanted to open it up to you all in terms of should we continue not having a parking minimum or a minimum parking requirement as it is today? Should we consider minimums, or is there recognizing that the only developments that are not really providing parking today are these infill developments that may have close access to transit and are on streets that potentially or most likely have on-street parking? Is there an in-between option? In other words, only requiring parking if there's no transit access and no on-street parking. So I'd like to open up for your discussion.
Councilmember Caballero.
Yeah, thank you. Just out of curiosity, there was also legislation introduced at the General Assembly, so wondering what the interaction is there. And I don't remember the bill's name, but it's a Senate bill, right? State Senate bill.
Yes, there's a bill that would supersede any parking requirement that we would consider anyway. So,
And yeah,
if adopted.
and that's just no parking, no minimum parking required, minimum parking in any situation, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and no dimensional requirements, no lots of other things, so.
Questions or comments related to the direction that is being requested?
I guess I just need more clarification. So when, sorry, I didn't get recognized, apologize. When you said development, there's a minimum parking requirement. So if you say, okay, I'm building this 400, apartment building, what have you, you have to have a minimum of parking spaces to accommodate that. Is that what you all mean by that?
That is what we mean when we refer to a minimum parking requirement, which the ordinance had until a recent change that was adopted by the council and county commissioners. And the thought process behind that, of course, is that the amount, if there's parking needed, the development will choose to provide adequate number of parking spaces, which we've seen to generally continue to be the case. Again, it hasn't been a very long time, so I'm not, I don't say that with 100% certainty, but just, anecdotally what we've noticed. And so we no longer have those minimums in our current code. And so the question that I'm asking of you all is, should we continue with that as our policy, or given the concerns shared by our city transportation partners, should we consider implementing either minimums or instances where there are minimums?
Comments, questions, colleagues?
Do you need more guidance than what we've provided just now?
I would love more guidance than what has been provided.
I think maybe it's just something we track because we'll be making text amendments like we do currently to the UDO. Because if it is what you're saying, anecdotally, I mean, it's been almost 2 years since we've changed the parking, well, maybe a year and a half. And so if there hasn't been, it was the same as with expanding housing choices. We kind of monitor, everyone was really afraid that there were going to be tear downs, didn't really manifest. And then I don't want us to do a lot of work on a thing that we might get preempted from doing anyway. So that's where I'm at. Thank you.
So what I'll say is developments tend to provide vehicular parking in municipalities across the US. We're an auto-dependent society. Sometimes you can't get loans if you don't provide adequate parking, if you're not showing the banks and your lenders that you have adequate parking. So it's not just the zoning regulations. It is in most zoning regulations. And oftentimes you'll actually find developers that are providing more parking than is socially sustainable. And so that's why you actually saw on that table on the screen a column for parking maximums, because increasingly municipalities are adopting vehicular parking maximums to make sure that parking isn't being over-provided, which has tended to be a major issue across the United States. Developers provide parking because sometimes it's hard to even sell a property or rent a property if you can't demonstrate to a potential tenant or potential buyer that you have parking spaces. So there are a lot of different factors going into this. And as we transition from a city that is entirely auto-dependent to one that at least expands your options realistically and safely, it's this little chicken and egg thing of we create inconveniences for vehicular parking and driving, but at the same time, we're trying to provide additional ways of getting around, more bike lanes, more multi-use trails, better transit service. And so there's this trade-off of to what degree do we make this thing a little less convenient to make this thing a little more convenient? They can't both be convenient at the same time. And so this is an important part of that, is thinking through vehicular standards in a way that is logical and in a way that is also shifting us away from an entirely auto-dependent city to one that is providing additional modal choices. So when I'm thinking about getting rid of the parking minimums, in theory, I really like that. I want us to move in that direction. In practice, it seems, and unsurprisingly, like most developers are still providing plenty of vehicular parking. A couple concerns. One concern is, particularly in places like downtown, that we might shift the burden of providing parking from the private to the public. That's one concern of mine. I don't know that if that's played out or not. So I want to make sure that as we continue to be an auto-dependent city where people continue to buy and own and maintain their vehicles and use them as the main transportation source, that they are able to park in places where they need to so that we can support businesses in various places around our city, and that it's not the burden is not on the public, is not on the city, is not on the county to make sure that there is parking, that continues to be on the private sector, because we have many other burdens that we need to be dealing with. We don't need to be dealing with parking. Specific to transportation's concerns, I guess I would be open to what you all might have in mind. I don't necessarily want to provide direction today. Yes, let's go ahead and add parking requirements where we don't already have them. If there are specific cases where you think there's some reasonable standard or some reasonable test, or if the developer can demonstrate that there is a parking space within a quarter-mile walk or something like that, I would like to see that. If transportation has any suggestions, I would be open to those. I don't specifically want to provide direction today that says, let's make sure to provide additional parking requirements, minimum parking requirements. Any other thoughts, colleagues?
I think for me, when I look.
Recognize you and
Sorry.
Tricia Harris.
Forgive me. I think for me, when I look around Durham and I see these big parking lots that are not being utilized and all the space, like things that we could build on those parking lots, and recognize that, you know, it's not the highest and best use of land. So I'm kind of concerned about that. But again, I don't feel like I have enough information to make a decision today. But I do recognize that, you know, we have to move from a city that depends on cars as much and that we're using land effectively in Durham. So I just wanted to say that.
Chair Shigaris?
Yes, I just, moving away from an auto-dependent city is awesome, great for the residents, but I think we need to keep in mind that there will be visitors coming, family and friends coming from out of town, and where are they going to park? I mean, if there's like one big parking deck that they use every now and again and it's a quarter-mile walk, are they going to not come visit friends and family? So keep in mind that.
Do you feel like you have some direction here? Councilmember Caballero?
Thank you. I think, so with the downtown parking in particular, we actually have overabundance of parking. We actually are in debt with the parking fund because we built a parking garage we shouldn't have built a few years ago. So I'm not particularly concerned about that. And if you want parking in big cities is its own nightmare. Like that is, you pay premium price to get good parking for owner or tenant. And the trade-off is you have to provide a good transit system. And that is what we are trying to move towards in Durham. I understand folks are out further, but that, to me, the market is responding in the fact that the consumer still wants parking, and so people are still providing parking. And other than a few infill projects, at least to date, and again, I think it's something we should track, it's not an issue. So it was a hard-fought battle to get rid of parking minimums. It's a national trend. I don't want to basically relitigate issues that were hard-fought and won. My interest is moving us forward. And so if it's a problem, just like in the past with the UDO, we do text amendments and we can change it. But I don't want to kind of backpedal on a thing that we've already made a lot of progress on. That's where my opinion is. I understand I'm one of many voices. Thank you.
Chair, I'd like to go along with the statements just made by our colleague from the city. I agree with you 100% on that. And to the extent that changes are required down the road, we'll have an opportunity to do that. So I just want to go on record.
All right. I can summarize. I don't think we're providing any specific direction today to make changes to minimum parking requirements to add them. But it sounds like we want to monitor the situation.
Appreciate that. That's clear. All right, get back to the next section. That's it for parking. I'll pause. Any questions? I know I was asking for direction then. Is there any other questions from you all so far?
Did we remove parking maximums, or were there never parking maximums in that right-hand column?
They're shown, but they are for less uses and it's more consolidated than our old table. So there are still maximums.
All right, let's keep going.
All right, so one other just pointing out that the standards for the parking lots themselves, there's actually some improvements to that language currently. The existing UDO is fairly inadequate in terms of those requirements. That's obviously subject to our ability to regulate that per the state. So that may be impacted by the legislation that Councilmember Caballero brought up. So for parking lot landscaping, We've got the proposed standards here. The terminology is changing from vehicular use area to parking lot landscaping. So I'm a fan of any time we can change language to make it like understandable for the folks that come in and ask us questions. One thing that we're doing with the new UDO every chance we can get is if we can have simple, relatable language. That is our intent. Now, in the interest of not so relatable language, we do have some work to do in this section in terms of coordinating it with the Durham Landscape Manual. So there's some improvements that we'll be making to this draft as currently proposed, as well as further updating the landscape manual once the new UDO is adopted. The standards themselves are fairly similar to the standards today. One thing I'll note, though, is much simpler, less pages, less convoluted, like overlapping regulations. It's much more clear that if you're providing parking, your parking shall have X landscaping. For the designers that submit site plans and the reviewers themselves, that will be a big improvement by itself. So. Moving on to the next section, fences and walls. So the headline here really is changing height requirements away from the tiered approach, or the standards being contingent on the tiers. Obviously, since we will no longer have tiers, there's more models included and there's more typologies for particular uses. We're continuing to work with our zoning enforcement folks and our customer service staff who deal with residents and homeowners who come in and ask questions about fences and or potentially have violations with due to fence height. And so this is something that we really want to focus on making user-friendly, recognizing that this is one of the sections of the ordinance that everyday residents, this is the part of the UDO they end up interacting with sort of first. So we've in addition to the typologies, which are specific to particular uses, the use of the models and diagrams is really important. So we're trying to make sure that it's clear. And just to back up a little bit, in terms of the typology and having them for specific uses, that's helpful because today's UDO does not do a really good job of regulating fence by district or use. And so we find ourselves with commercial fences not really having appropriate standards, or with residential fences not having the standards match up. So that's a benefit.
I remembered this time. So residents, when they're supposed to, when they put up a wall or fence, they're supposed to come through the city to make sure it's appropriate. Is that typically what's been done, or it's not being done?
No, we currently do not have a requirement for a permit for installation of a fence. Now we have standards, and so certainly, you know, there's a balance there, right? Like we don't want to have permits that are burdensome and require, you know, a layer of bureaucracy if someone just wants to put a fence up in their rear yard. However, that does mean that at times we are retroactively telling folks. And so this is, we get a lot of inquiries and we want to make it as clear and simple as possible. All right, the next section to go over retaining walls. So the draft right here that you're looking at is proposing tiered retaining walls. If there were 8 feet, and when you have more than one wall, no one wall can be more than 6. We are working with our partner departments, both in inspections and public works, to really to capture the, you know, we have some aesthetic concerns about retaining walls of a certain size, but we also, you know, need to make sure that structurally sound, and we are not encumbering too much land, right, and impacting the developability of a lot that does have a grade change. And so I expect this section of the draft to change substantially, but we are still trying to find the appropriate instances where we really want to prevent a large retaining wall, potentially, whether it be up against an adjoining property or up against the public right of way. So just these standards here, you'll see are probably much more stringent than where the next version will show you. So the landscape design section that you'll see, substantially similar to the current standards in today's UDO. Staff has made a lot of comments, and we're working with our consultant to better address some of the goals and action items around biodiversity and landscaping. So the standards, as you see, as they're shown here, are similar to the current UDO. We'll be making some updates to add some additional requirements to these. And as I mentioned earlier, making sure that there's coordination with the landscape manual. The next portion of the development, or next section of the development standard section, the mass grading buffers. These are going to continue to be required as they are today, as well as the additional transitions required if you choose mass grading or choose to mass grade a site. Same is true with, and then this isn't this portion, but just the recent amendments regarding phasing of a development. Similar to what Councilmember Caballero said, recognizing that there's a recent amendment adopted by the governing bodies to the current UDO, where the intent is to carry that forward into the new document. Next section, lighting standards. These are a bit more prescriptive than our current lighting standards. There's a few changes that we'll be making, both addressing bird-friendly design, as that has been a topic that's come up throughout our engagement, as well as currently there's no standards required for residential development. And so we'll be incorporating some maximums in those instances. So we have some limitations on sort of nuisance lighting concerns. We've got a few other sections, just general random design standards, as I keep scrolling, performance standards. These are, again, just addressing all the various impacts from development. One thing we'll note is for cemetery standards, we will be incorporating some additional survey requirements. The hope is to further document, protect, and ensure access to these cemeteries. There's multiple instances of language in the adopted comprehensive plan in regards to sort of the threat that development poses to many of our existing cemeteries throughout the community. That is it for the development standards and the rest of module 2. Just as a general update, we will be conducting engagement efforts in the month of May. We'll be consolidating to one in-person session later in the month. We'll let everyone know time and place as soon as we can. We will also, in addition, have virtual sessions. The office hours that we've held at the main library have been very successful, as Robin joked last month with you all. We're going to be expanding that offering. Just to reiterate, we're finding that because of and as you all see, that sort of the dense nature of this document and the amount of technical conversations that the engagement sort of necessitates. We're finding that the office hours are a great opportunity for residents to come in and read over it and talk with us. And it's much more, I think the engagement we're getting there is much more valuable than otherwise, just in terms of, you know, us being able to get an understanding of their concerns and then have a better understanding of the regulation itself. So I'll pause there. Any questions?
Councilman Caballero?
Thank you. With the lighting, just curious if we're investigating what it would take to be a dark sky city.
Yeah, that's actually written in my notes here. We're not that far off based on my read of those requirements. There are some components, there's some conflicts I know of, like in the sign section, current and proposed, that we would need to evaluate. And then I don't have it all memorized, but that was something that stood out when I reviewed it.
I appreciate that. I just think as we get more, it really does make a huge difference, not just for wildlife, but also for just humans.
Commissioner Burton?
Just explain what's a dark sky city?
Thank you. It is basically a certification or an initiative that you can get that limits your light pollution. And so cities, I know about it. My sister lives in Tucson, and they're one of the kind of examples lifted up. For them, it's because they have a lot of astronomy in the area, and so light pollution impacted them. There's also a city in Chile that is same thing for astronomy purposes, for science purposes. They worked really diligently with that community to not impact the scientific work. So that's where I'd heard of it. And a few years ago, and I think some folks remember when our lights were switched over to LED, it really changed the kind of tone on the street. And so we got a lot of complaints from residents. And at that point, Duke Energy had done the thing. It would have been a huge cost to change what we'd been doing. But then at that time, I was like, well, moving forward, I wonder if it makes sense to think about how do we do this differently in the future.
Their colleagues? Comments, questions? So I appreciate the work on the retention walls, the retaining wall. Make sure that we don't just have these long blank spaces, you know, for pedestrians and others. I think that's important, and I appreciate that work. For review, are you all bringing these to boards and committees, or is it more incumbent upon boards and committees to be proactive in reviewing this and providing input?
So we proactively brought it to Planning Commission, obviously as the most relevant advisory board. We have provided updates to some boards at the request, but you know, and we've communicated out to them in terms of the materials and certainly soliciting feedback, and then really leaving it up to them in terms of how involved they choose to be.
That's great. Couple questions. General design standards, are those going to be with these standards, or is that going to be separate? And then second, sustainability standards and incentives, is that going to be part of this section?
So the design standards are district specific, and so they're in the previous module. We can share those with you and sort of update with that. And then in terms of sustainability, our hope, our current approach is to have sustainability requirements throughout in terms of whether it be the landscaping requirements or the tree coverage requirements. We are currently discussing through like the RD, R2, R3 options, if sustainability as an opt-in there is appropriate. This is something that we've actually just the last 2 meetings we have with our consultant, we've talked a lot about those sustainability from a large development standpoint, and then individual small projects.
Okay, so TBD on sustainability?
Yes, but it's something that our current approach and our preference is, of course, to have it throughout the document in terms of all the requirements, rather than it be 100% opt-in. We are limited in terms of what they can or what can be required as an absolute, especially when you start talking about anything that violates or doesn't violate, but anything that's in addition to building code.
Okay. I would just, again, encourage looking at Kannapolis, North Carolina.
Yeah,
Sustainability.
yeah, Councilmember Baker, we looked at Kannapolis and spoke to their staff just last week and interviewed them, and we can discuss the research
Great.
with you. So, yeah.
And then there won't be general design standards. There will be design standards embedded in the districts.
Mhm.
Okay. All right. Anything else, colleagues? All right. Let's move on to the next item. It's a new UDO update, NPOs, and use table continuation.
Good morning. Robin Schultz, Planning Department. I'm here this morning to give you an update on the use table as part of another UDO update. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about both the use table, how we're continuing that work, and also talk to you a bit about neighborhood protection overlays. So we did bring the use table to you all in December of last year, I believe. And just to sort of go over that, because I know a couple of y'all were not here in December, the use table is a pretty small part of the UDO in terms of actual text, but it does play a massive role in how we both use and develop land, right? So it sort of determines and dictates what you can actually do, right? Which also determines when you need a rezoning. It also provides additional tools, so determining when like a minor special use permit might be appropriate, or additional limited use standards for particular uses, things of that nature. So within the first draft, essentially our consultant Code Studio provided, they sort of just transposed our existing use table onto those new districts that they proposed. We're further calibrating that because, we hear from residents all the time. We're thinking about the comprehensive plan, thinking about overall usability, right? And just sort of our general heartburn and issues that we've had with the use table. So we've been really focusing on trying to update it. So that was within module 1. We've been working a lot since then. It's still a draft, and you'll see a draft of the use table in attachment A. But some of the sort of major work that we've been doing are, one, including data centers as a new use. This is something we're hearing a lot. And so the sort of plus of having it explicitly stated is that we can explicitly state standards that we want for them, right? So commercial heavy, and industrial zoning districts, we're going to have additional required buffers, a 200-foot setback from both residential uses and residential zones, right? And noise study requirements to ensure compliance with all of our noise ordinances. They can be, these are an interesting sort of new use, right, to think about. So trying to think about how we mitigate them as they probably start coming in. One thing that we heard from you all last time is that maybe a distance requirement for family care homes was not appropriate. There are definitely some equity issues there. And so we removed the distance requirement for family care homes and group homes, but we did retain the MSUP requirement for group homes, since those could have negative impacts on surrounding properties. There could be some compatibility issues which might be useful in thinking about placing those in neighborhoods. We also consolidated a lot of uses. Oh, go ahead.
The MSUP is minor special use permit?
Correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure that, because not everyone knows the acronyms. Thank you.
Can you also just remind us, what is the procedure for a minor special use permit?
Right. So a minor special use permit goes before the Board of Adjustment. And essentially what you must do is show that you meet certain standards for compatibility. So things like circulation, landscaping, et cetera. And so you must also provide that in terms of expert testimony. And so generally we're trying to veer away from them in some instances, right? Because it makes it hard for residents to come. It's hard for residents to find experts and things of that nature, but group homes they have it's between 6 and 13 people, right? So it is a jump from a family care home, whereas state statute says that a family care home is up to 6. And essentially the way that it's worded is that you can't really treat a family care home separate from a single family residential unless you want to institute a distance requirement. And so we heard that you were particularly, well, maybe not interested in that. Correct me if I'm wrong. So we removed that distance requirement, but we did keep the MSUP for group homes just to allow for some measure of compatibility, because those do have more individuals residing in that home, right? So it's 6 to 13, which may not be appropriate in the middle of a neighborhood, et cetera, but it may, hence the minor special use permit. Did I answer your question? Okay, just making sure. And so we also did some consolidation of uses. The use table has been around for a while. For instance, things like diet houses and social services institutions. When Director Young and I were looking at that, I think a social service institution was essentially like an asylum, which we would classify as a hospital now, right? So trying to take those things and classify them into the medical use, medical office, use category, just thinking about how we would actually really think about how these function and where they should go, right? And just consolidating that to make it more user-friendly. And so sort of lastly, one of the major things that we did was, really thinking about neighborhood services, walkability, all those goals from the comp plan. We know that RD is replacing a lot of the sort of infill zoning districts. So including retail sales and service, restaurants and office uses within the RD zoning district with a minor special use permit.
How does that get to the recently introduced legislation around not like that commercial is going to be allowed in residential, like we can't differentiate that as much? And maybe I'm not asking very clearly, and I apologize. Yeah, I forget the name of the bill.
So that bill is actually about allowing residential in all commercial.
Got it.
Which,
Not the,
yeah,
okay.
not the other way around, which we're trying to introduce some limited commercial in residential district so that we can achieve this 15-minute. So it's kind of the inverse.
Perfect. Thank you. And this is key. I mean, you should be able to walk to a pub or a coffee shop, like for everybody's sanity. Thanks.
All right, I'm going to hand it over to Bo.
Well, I do have one quick question on that. Is there any good reason in your mind to shift from this minor special use permit process to like conditional use and maybe instead of it going to quasi judicial proceeding, going to the planning commission?
Yeah, so we don't really have any conditional uses right now which go before the planning commission. Right now, it's just a rezoning. So that would just be a new process. I'm not quite sure what that would look like in terms of state statute.
Would that be less of a burden? Would that be an easier process for staff or applicants? And yet it wouldn't just be a staff level approval. It'd still go through some discretion. Neighbors could still voice their opposition. But it would be simpler than going all the way to the city council and might be simpler than going through the quasi judicial proceeding.
Yeah, so I think that's sort of a policy decision that you all have to make, whether or not you want this to be, a rezoning, which goes before you all, right? Is the use allowed? And if the answer is no, then it is a rezoning, right? And then it does go through like the planning commission, and then you all and people can voice their opposition without that expert testimony, or you can say it is allowed, but you do need to provide an expert showing that circulation, landscaping, all of that stuff within the minor special use permit is being met. So for me, that seems like a policy decision on your part, and the sort of comfort that you all have with either of those processes.
Councilman Caballero?
So one thing that I want to share is we've really tried to think of use permits, because they are quasi-judicial, for things that in general you want to allow, but there is this kind of additional review needed in that it needs to be objective, right? It cannot be emotional testimony. I just don't want this thing near me, which is a lot of what comes out in legislative hearings like rezonings, right? And there is ultimate discretion in a legislative hearing to approve or deny based on any reason or no reason at all. So the reason we have left some things at the use permit, even though that is a higher burden, is because it was our understanding that these were things that were generally we were okay with. And so we wanted to remove that motion and try and make it as objective as possible in terms of, what's being evaluated, whether or not there are actual impacts or not. But if the direction is to move it to a legislative forum, we're open to that. We were just reacting to what we believe we had heard.
Councilmember Campiar.
Yeah, I'm just trying to make sure we're all on the inclusion of retail sales, service, restaurant, office uses. That's I want to understand what we're discussing right now.
Yep.
Yeah. So
Yep.
the way it's currently what y'all are brainstorming around is to say that process would go through a special use permit, which is then just going to the Board of Adjustment versus making it a rezoning. And you're saying that that's a policy decision. And I would say that a special use, the board, I don't know when it happened, but many years ago, what the Board of Adjustment, the types of case, I guess at some point, council did special use permits, minor special use permits, and it got handed over to the Board of Adjustment to streamline the work because the rezoning is often more onerous. And so I'm assuming that this is an example of again, trying to use the Board of Adjustment as efficiently and effectively as possible. And I would say that a rezoning is definitely more onerous. You have two different rounds you have Planning Commission, which is advisory, and then you have council. So versus you just show up in front of the Board of Adjustment. So while yes, it's quasi-judicial just from the practical process of it, you're going through one process versus two essentially.
So there's the minor special use permit, which goes before the Board of Adjustment, right? There's the major special use permit, which does go to council, correct? There is by right uses. There are uses that have standards attached specifically to those uses. And there are rezonings. And then there are also something that's not currently included in this draft. It would be conditional uses, which it's used conditional on certain things, and it would have more of this discretion as you were stating, Director Young. And so a question here. So one case of a minor special use permit that's being proposed is this one of retail sales, service, restaurant, and office uses in RD zoning districts. I support that. I think that's a good idea. My only question was, do we want to go through the minor special use permit process for something like that? Or would we want to do something like a conditional use, which would be introducing a new concept into this UDO rewrite? And Director Young pointed out, here's the benefits, here's the downsides of that process. Any other thoughts?
Sorry, this is Aaron Miles with the City Attorney's Office. When you say conditional use permits, what are you referring to? Because pre-160D, those did exist. After 160D, they were all rolled into the same process for special use permits, which goes through the quasi-judicial process. So I'm just looking through what when you're referring to that, what are you referring to so we can see if we could do it under the current statute.
So are there no more conditional uses?
So under 160D, the conditional use permits that used to exist were rolled into special use permits. So they go through the quasi-judicial process. There is a conditional zoning process, which of course the city of Durham doesn't go through because we have our own special development plan zoning, which is similar in the process, but they're under 160D, which is the land use statutes. It doesn't provide a separate process for conditional use permits.
So conditional zoning would be the district versus the use.
Yes.
Understood.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, and at that point, I think the staff's opinion was, if you're going for a rezoning anyway, there's no, the time, it takes a lot longer. Usually folks can get to Board of Adjustment within a much more reasonable 5-ish weeks or something like that, 5 to 6 weeks. Whereas a rezoning, through the various processes, at best case is like 4 months at the fastest.
So option is by right with conditions attached to it, minor special use permit, or they have to rezone, which would be a heavy burden to try to do that. So this is a middle ground to say this is a permitted use. It's a little more challenging, and so we want you to go through this additional process and make sure that you're meeting these standards. That makes sense. Councilmember Caballero.
Thank you. And then again, we will be able to evaluate and like everything else with the UDO and see if it is burdensome and what our feedback is. I mean, I will point out this is commercial use. These are folks who, this isn't a resident saying, I want to put up a fence, right? Like I think that the burden of somebody doing commercial is different than an individual or, and so I think it's a fair thing to put that on folks who are doing, at the end of the day, for-profit work, right?
One last question. Is there a way of having a procedure so that is similar to a conditional use?
I can definitely look into that. I'm not aware of one at this moment, but I'm happy to do that research and get back with you.
Okay, thank you. All right, let's keep going.
All right, I'm going to hand it off to Bo.
Thanks, Rob. I feel short every time I do that after. All right, Bo Dobrinsky, planning. So back to pose, to seek some additional direction on a different topic with the new UDO draft, this new UDO marathon session we've got. Neighborhood protection overlays. So this is an overlay district option that is in the current UDO, intended to protect the established character of a neighborhood. I plucked out some of the petition requirements here in the slide. Structures, or most of the structures are over 25 years old, must be at least 15 acres. The applicant, or the petitioner, would provide documentation of the physical character, historical, and social significance as a part of their application. It then is up to the governing body to act on this. So it is not, it's not the same thing as an applicant or a property owner petitioning a rezoning. This ultimately is the decision of the governing bodies to move forward with the neighborhood protection overlay. Currently there are 2 NPOs, and I'm going to talk a little bit about them and their standards, just to give you some background on this. So our first NPO was the Tuscaloosa Lakewood, which has been around for almost 20 years, 07, I think. Time is flying. Many of the standards with the original adoption are no longer legal based on our limitations for architectural requirements on 1, 2, 3, or 4 family residential. So much of what was originally adopted has been scaled back. There have been subsequent zoning text amendments that have impacted those original requirements. For example, there had previously been a prohibition on flag lots in this overlay district, and that is no longer there. And so the current standards that are really the most impactful are the requirements that for tree preservation and landscaping within the yards, maximum height for non-residential at 35 feet. I believe there's only been 1, maybe 2 non-residential developments in this NPO. Much of the district is residential. Maximum driveway width of 12 feet. So those are really the requirements we're seeing when folks come in and want to develop within this NPO. Talk a little bit about our other NPO, Old West Durham. This was adopted, I believe, in 2019, so a little more recent. The real focus here, as it was an old mill village with many smaller homes, was to focus on the bulk or the massing of the structures themselves. And so there is a required floor area ratio, as well as additional height limitations in this district. There are also similar landscaping requirements to the Lakewood Tuscaloosa, not the exact same. There's also a maximum lot size of, I believe, 12,500 square feet. To discourage recombination of many of the lots as they're already fairly small. And then similar driveway width requirements as well. So that is the current requirements as it is. I will say that with the help of Chris, of course, took a look at all of the building permits that have been approved in this NPO since its adoption. And 2/3 of the new single families have been small lot, small house options, which those limitations supersede many of these. And so these requirements have had no impact on those in terms of the size of the structure. There were 8 other structures that were, and again, I don't know the intentions of all these applicants, right, in terms of what they wanted to build or what they would have chosen to construct if they could. But there were up to 8 others that may have been impacted by the FAR. However, because these developments are also subject to our infill height requirements, the height restriction due to the infill standards actually was prevented them from increasing the size before these standards did. So there were probably a few structures that were smaller due to these requirements, but it is not clear, it doesn't seem apparent that there's been a whole lot of impacts in terms of the size of the structures. These other requirements in terms of the landscaping and the driveways, they're similar to Lakewood Tuscaloosa, just different verbiage. Can I take some questions because I see a face or two?
Sure.
Yes, so I'm Googling neighborhood protection overlay to make sure I understand what it is. So I guess the question I have is what goes into the decision of choosing the neighborhoods that get this designation?
Yeah, it's a really great question. So the current UDO prescribes an application process or a petition process. And so members of that neighborhood organize and put together the required documentation and submit it to the planning department. It is then, the information is provided to the electeds and they then choose to act on the petition or not. It's based on the desire and organizing of the particular community. The consensus may not be there in many of those instances. We have seen other neighborhoods in the community. Certainly some residents may want the NPO, whereas some of their neighbors don't want additional zoning regulations. And so that in itself, the idea of it comes to that petition, certainly, and assuming that they provide that documentation, which is fairly subjective, I think. Just words like character and social character, I mean, I think all those things are really subjective. And so then it's up to the governing bodies. Does that answer the?
Yes, because I was wondering, so it's basically the people in those neighborhoods who petition to have this extra protection to preserve the character of the neighborhood. So you answered it.
Yes, just to hammer home this point, not necessarily every single member of that particular neighborhood.
Councilman Caballero.
Thank you. I guess if a lot of this stuff is already being addressed, I mean, that's essentially what I'm hearing, right? Is that it's already kind of it is either currently being addressed or will be, right? I don't really know if it's worth, keeping rules that are basically not doing anything. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm at. And that's based on what I'm hearing, but I could be not understanding.
Sure. Councilmember Caballero, yeah, the question that I have for you all is, our intention is to, with the new UDO, incorporate some individual lot landscaping requirements. I don't have the details what they'll specifically be. But, using these NPOs as a model, right, in terms of the requirements to either preserve trees where they can or additional landscaping beyond just a street tree, or street tree and yard tree. Really looking into that. Same thing with the driveway requirements. The standards in module 1 had similar driveway limitations to what is already in the NPO. And then obviously with the RD2 and RD3 options, we expect smaller lots to be constructed, and that's similar to the concerns that were with the Old West NPO specifically. And so we really want to hear from you all if we should carry over the existing neighborhood protection overlays and how that looks, if we should continue having the overlay district as something that residents could petition for in the new UDO, or if we recognize that we're going to try and attempt to have these protections jurisdiction-wide.
Councilmember Caballero?
Thank you. Can you remind me what the RD2 and 3 are?
Yeah, I apologize. So in the RD district, which is where we talked about applying to the established residential within city limits, RD2 and RD3 are options where a developer could choose to limit the size of the structure, the RD2, and subsequently have more dwellings on a particular development with more relaxed standards, but they would have to be smaller. And then the RD3 is a similar model, but where a portion of the development is providing dwelling units that are affordable.
And RD is residential design? Is that what what does it mean?
The D, it's just the residential districts are A, B, C, D.
RD, okay,
and
residential district. got
And
it.
D is the most dense. It's the base lot size is 5,000, so it's fairly similar to our RU5 today, but it's being proposed.
Could y'all just send us the kind of lot maximums and minimums for each one?
Sure.
That would be really helpful. And in general, just kind of the visualization of maybe that would be helpful. It's hard to kind of say, how do we move forward without having at least for me, a visual of what that actually looks like.
Okay.
Thank you.
Chair Shigaris?
Yeah, I have a quick question on the NPOs. You said some of the residents aren't in favor and some are. Is there a majority like, oh, hey, we have to have 51% before we move forward with this? There's no standard for.
There's no requirement for that.
Okay, thank you.
Colleagues, anything else?
Do you need more guidance?
I would like, yes.
So I'm just gonna, I don't know if we've done very well here, sorry. I mean, I think that, especially in spaces where it looks like it's not, why have additional if it's already going to be incorporated anyway? I would be interested to know, to your point around the UDO landscaping requirements, what does that mean to do that in all RD districts? Like, what's the impact? What is the burden for folks moving forward or not? I think, yeah, especially the driveway, it looks like that's the way we're moving anyway. So that seems kind of redundant. And then again, the small lot option, I mean, that's moving us to where we want anyway. And then finally, just NPOs. I mean, I think that at least as an individual, as one council member, we consistently say, you know, in my vision, like, it doesn't seem fair to put the burden of development on only certain neighborhoods. I think that that's when you get into the, current concerns around gentrification and displacement. It's, okay, well, this neighborhood was, which is maybe wealthier and more organized, was able to prevent a thing, and this neighborhood over here was not. And so then the burden of development gets felt differently. And I am pretty consistent and clear that I think Durham is growing, period, and that doesn't seem particularly fair And I think historically, that's what communities have done, which is why you see these kind of preserved neighborhoods in amber, which great preservation, but then what was the cost? And who you got to preserve a thing, but this other neighborhood didn't, right? So I think generally speaking, we say we want density everywhere. We say we want affordability everywhere. And so I don't know if, and I voted for that neighborhood protection overlay district in 2019. That was a unanimous vote on council. But I think we've done a lot of work since then to think about, you know, height restrictions and things like that. And what is that? How does that look and how is that being felt in a community? Thank you.
Thank you, Councilwoman Caballero, Councilmember Caballero, because I was thinking the same thing. Like, and that's why I asked the question, how is the decision made for a neighborhood protection overlay? Because it seemed like, okay, if you have people in the neighborhood who knows how to organize and to come to the city council to get this protection overlay, but then if you have people in another neighborhood and they don't know all the rules and know how to organize or what have you, and it just seemed a little like, okay, this is kind of an equity issue. So, but I didn't know how to articulate it. So I want to say thank you for articulating that way. Yeah, somehow we have to make it standard for all the neighborhoods. Like I'm thinking about, like I drive down Fayetteville Street a lot, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm thinking that the city council is, you know, investing money into redeveloping that. And, you know, it kind of like, okay, this is a historic corridor, and like, how do we, you know, what do we do to help in that area? Even though I'm not on council, I'm on commission, but I'm just thinking about those things. So thank you.
Yeah, what I'll say is I have a love-hate relationship with neighborhood protection overlays. I'm not sure that the name is that accurate. My knee-jerk reaction, and I you know, sort of flinch whenever I think of like neighborhood protection. It makes my brain go to, you know, protect the character and these things that we've heard about folks who just want to keep people they don't like out of their own neighborhoods and preserve the character of their neighborhood. I think that's sort of a traditional kind of what many of us think of. But then when you actually look at some of the standards, I mean, it's like logical stuff. It's like we want trees, you know, we want not a minimum lot size, but a maximum lot size, a maximum width to driveways. There's just some very logical things in there that, you know, we look at and embed that into the underlying base zoning districts, which it sounds like you're doing. At the same time, I kind of see, I agree with my colleagues that who's going to end up using NPOs, it's going to be the neighborhoods that have the privilege of being able to organize. And it's also kind of a release valve. It's like, if we're missing something that's happening in this neighborhood or that neighborhood, it's a way for the neighborhood to organize and propose some ideas that would ultimately have to get approved anyway, legislatively, and could simply be denied. And so, you know, I think there's some good, I think there's some bad. I would be interested, so specific to the existing neighborhood protection overlays, I'd be interested in seeing, okay, well, this standard and that standard and this standard are going to be embedded into the base zoning district. So what's left, communicating that to the neighborhood specifically, and then saying, you know, are you okay with us doing this? Or, you know, what's your opinion? What's your opinion? Provide some input. And then ultimately decision makers will be city council, county commission. As far as new NPOs, I'm not against leaving that process in at the moment as a release valve, as a way. I think that there are much better ways. I think small area planning is going to decrease this feeling that a lot of folks have that there's no way of providing input into shaping the world that people live in. I think the new UDO is going to do a lot of that. So at this point, I'm not against leaving it in. If someone you know, makes a good case for taking them out, then I would support that. But at this point, I'd see them as kind of as a release valve. And I think I saw Councilmember Caballero.
Thank you. Agree with Councilmember Baker, and I think I said it, just what is that? There's stacking them up against each other, and especially if the whatever's in Tuscaloosa makes sense, right? Then in other, makes sense broadly in the RD districts, then yeah, we should just do it. It's a good idea. I think with NPOs, I mean, at least at this point, I mean, there's no even standards around like percentages of who gets to do what. And people moving in, I mean, a lot of these neighborhoods historically have had aging residents. And so as those neighborhoods turn over, you move into a neighborhood you didn't necessarily know that you moved into an NPO or whatnot. So I do think that there has to be, I'm not in favor of keeping them in, period. I do want to say that. But I think if we are going to, that there has to be some kind of, you got a certain percentage of your neighbors involved. Having been on council at the Old West Durham, I mean, it got pretty fraught in that neighborhood with folks, you know, like churning on that neighborhood listserv, which is a pretty active neighborhood listserv generally. And so if we're going to keep them in, like right now, I mean, there's no percentage. I mean, you can't hit, like before when you wanted to get your street paved, you had to get a certain percentage of your neighbors to agree when you wanted that street paving. And that seems to be a lot more innocuous than a neighborhood protection overlay. And we don't have a like 60% of the folks have to say yes to this thing, or 51% or however we do it. Thank you.
Councilmember Caballero and Baker, the requirements that are in the NPOs, the language won't be the same. So I won't say it's 1-to-1, but for example, the landscaping, there's a 3%, or there's a percentage requirement, and then there's a requirement that you're not impacted on single family lots, except for access or for construction. We don't know exactly how that language will transfer over. I understand you'd want to see that. What I can say with some confidence is what would remain that wouldn't apply across RD district, for example, or for most comparative, most similar, would be the height restriction in the Old West at 31 feet, and the FAR, and then obviously the max lot. I think those are. I feel pretty confident saying that we can just narrow down to that would be the purpose of them continuing, and then that ultimately becomes a how tall do we want our infill development to be jurisdiction wide, or do we want to continue to ensure that this neighborhood or others that, you know, other NPOs may have applied have a similar height restriction. So I hate to, I'm at the risk of oversimplifying it. I think that's really what we're talking about here.
Is that 31, is that just for single family?
Believe it says 31 foot for residential uses, I think.
How many stories is 31 feet? Again, like I'm having a hard time.
So typically, the reason I said that, I'm not sure if that even came up, is in the RU5 district where you have the infill standards, you have to be within 14 feet of any other structure on the block face. So if you have 1 story, typically you can have 2 stories, right, existing, and if you have 2, you typically go to 3. And so they've all been 2 because the existing had been 1. And so I'm not sure if the 31 ended up being the max anyway because of the infill standards, which is.
Can you send me pictures?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, because I'm like the neighborhood, like 31 feet in a neighborhood with a lot of 1-story housing, right? That's a big, right? So I think that it's 2 stories, right? If you're gonna make your lot maximum small, right? You may want that flexibility of being able to go up, right? We don't necessarily want a city that is a 1-story city moving forward for forever, right? And so I think that's where I'm having a little bit of like, I'm trying to imagine what are we saying no to, I guess, is where I'm at in the future, because this is not, you do a UDO, when was the last one, 2005? Right, so yeah, 2006, it's been a minute, and so we want to get this as close to right as we can. Obviously, we'll have text amendments, but I think that's where I'm struggling is currently when I think about both those neighborhoods, and I know that there's not the height limitation in Tuscaloosa that there is in Old West. I don't want to prohibit folks moving forward. Housing stock degrades. Sometimes things are not salvageable. some of the times those old mill houses, as much as we want to preserve them, cannot be preserved. And so if you have to take it down, what are your options moving forward? And is it getting us again to that longer term goal that's already been captured in the comprehensive plan around increased density so that we can get to that vision of a 15-minute city?
So one thing that I wanted to add, share maybe a bit of my concern with the notion of keeping NPOs. Is currently worded, the purpose is to protect established character by modifying standards of the base district to more effectively match density, intensity, or established character. And so my worry is that it would be used to basically undo the things that we are trying to do universally through the ordinance to implement the comprehensive plan. If we're going to take kind of all the good things that are left in the NPOs and apply them universally to all neighborhoods, that's definitely a route that we are proponents of. But I do have some concerns of how, if we left NPO on the books, what we would get and how it would be utilized.
Is NPO, is that a very specific Chapter 160D enabling legislation term, or is that just how we're?
I don't think it is.
Okay. It's just an overlay district, and we call it a neighborhood protection overlay, and we come up with the language of preserving. Okay. So, and we could set limitations so that, you can't use NPOs to, to go against what we're trying to accomplish in the comprehensive plan. I mean, we could set standards within the NPO. Would that be possible?
I think maybe what you're kind of alluding to is there a zoning related mechanism that folks could proactively use or petition for to address specific issues that they see coming up? Whether it's whatever it's branded as, that would not necessarily undo the good things that we're trying to do. So we can certainly look at that. We had talked even in the past about the private text amendment process, right? And putting guardrails on that and how that can be used. So I think maybe those two things together need to become a separate staff conversation about how do we make it easier for average community members to make changes more accessible to them, to have a chance to propose changes. But what are the limitations we want to put on that? So if you all are amenable to that, let us kind of give that some thought.
Okay, I'm good with that. I think one I guess theme that I think is part of everything that I'm thinking about regarding NPOs, regarding the rewrite, regarding the RD district is I don't want us to incentivize through our dimensional standards, incentivize tearing down small homes and the people who live in small homes and replacing them with large homes and the people that live in large homes, while still incentivizing, again, through kind of like the opt-in districts and other creative mechanisms, missing middle housing in our neighborhoods that provide additional public benefits. And so kind of wrestling with that and the uniqueness of each individual neighborhood, what are the tools that we have available to tailor our zoning regulations so that we are protecting, or at least we are not incentivizing the mass tear down and gentrification displacement of our neighborhoods that have the small homes, people live in those with people who want to tear them down and replace them with big homes. And not forcing that upon neighborhoods, but allowing them to be the ones that say, yes, this is an additional zoning regulation that we're willing to place on ourselves. So just something I'm wrestling with. Councilmember Caballero, did I see your hand?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to say thank you for that clarification, Director Young. I think that's essentially, I'm interested in this, maybe compromise is not the right word, but that there's a mechanism. To your point, it literally lists density in the NPO, which is counter to what we want. And I think it's not lost on me in Tuscaloosa, they banned flag lots until we said, okay. And so there's like that, like everyone does better when everybody does better, right? So it's this kind of same thing. Like I'm pretty clear in the densification of the city cannot fall on the backs of poor, less organized communities. It has to fall on everyone. The movement towards a 15-minute city, same thing. So whatever we need to do to get there, I'm willing to do it. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? All right. Thank you, Bo.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Chapter 70 Code Amendment.
Good morning, Sarah Long, City County Planning. I'm here to present on some changes to the city code for chapter 7129. This will be going before City Council on April 21st. And so this is something that's been in the works for some time. It's a part of the implementation of a comprehensive plan. We state in policy 130 that we want to support the health and safety of county residents by providing water and sewer upgrades when needed and available. And we have a specific action that states that we want to explore amending the city code to allow existing properties outside of the primary corporate limits to connect to adjacent existing public and sewer water lines. So this was a part of a response to community engagement, where we heard there were specific cases where there were water lines, but primarily in the northern part, the northern part of the city, just outside of the city limits, where the residents could potentially connect to that water line that was right in front of their house, running in the street in front of their house. And we needed to make some adjustments that would allow them to do that without annexing it into the city. So we made a couple of adjustments. One was expanding the definition of what unsatisfactory water conditions that communities have. So this is for number 7. We expanded that to having collapse wells or unsatisfactory water quantity. And so in those cases, residents would be able to apply for a UEA, which is a utility extension agreement, and they could potentially have access to existing water systems. And then for section 7, section 8, we're looking at cases where a UEA is not required, but you have existing lots that are up to 20 acres where there is an existing main that's within 500 feet, and they would be able to connect to those as long as they do not have more than 2 residential units. And then finally, as a part of the implementation of the comprehensive plan and specifically our urban growth boundary, wanted to state clearly that we will not be extending water and sewer lines outside of the urban growth boundary, except for these exceptions that we mentioned that it's an issue of public health. Any questions?
Sure.
I just want to say I like that. I think that's really a good thing that, we're doing, to help city residents make sure they have clean water. So that's all I want. And county residents, sorry, county residents. County residents have clean water, so thank you.
Thank you. Are we going to track it to make sure it's not being abused?
Yes.
Okay. Because I definitely want folks who are having clear public health issues to have safe, clean drinking water. What I also don't want is for folks to have a mechanism to not want to pay more taxes for a way wonderful community. Like, we spend a lot of money on a high quality water system. And that's user-based, but there's other, basically, and I'm glad that we limited it to 2 residential. I can imagine a world where folks are like, well, it's only 5 or it's only, right? And so you got to pay for the thing. If you want, if you want access to this high quality thing, you have to be a city resident unless there's like a real clear public health reason. And we want to support those residents.
Yeah, a couple of things are built into this to protect from that. Like you mentioned, the 2 units. Also, Public Works will have to do an assessment of this. We're not allowing any lots to be subdivided. So if you have a case where someone has a larger lot, they're subdividing it and they want to put, residential, they have a 20-acre lot and they want to make it,
It's still only 2 residents because I
Yeah.
subdivided the lot, right? I got
it's
it.
true, but
Yeah.
they can potentially subdivide. And then also there's just the engineering restriction. If there's not enough water pressure, they're not going to be able to connect, so.
All right, thank you. I agree with my colleagues. I think this is a good response to some of the things we've been hearing. I 110% agree with Councilmember Caballero. I think we need to make sure completely that this is not able to be abused. And it sounds like you've done a lot of thinking to make sure that it can't be abused. And so let's just monitor that and make sure that it continues to be the case. So I think that's it for us. So let's move on to fiscal year 26 Planning Department Work Program. Thank you so much.
All right, so this is a follow-up from the kind of early heads up that you got in February. This is the actual proposed work program. We took the feedback from you all, particularly that we did not need to be quite as aggressive with the amount of small area plans that we were trying to jam into one work program. And so the only change from what we had proposed in February is we're just focusing on 3 small area plans for next year. So that is, I'm happy to answer questions. There are no additional changes, and the items were listed in the cover memo, the things that are new to the work program. So I'm happy to answer any questions.
Colleagues? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. I'll just say as a huge advocate of small area planning, I won't be upset if you only get to 2 rather than 3. I think it's important that they're done very well, and not just a box to check, and that we're focused on implementation and doing a great job. So again, I think quality over quantity on those. At some point, I think it would be helpful for me to see like a Gantt chart kind of thing of our long range projects, just to kind of see like when are we expecting to see X project begin and when are we expecting to see that end, and kind of all the long range projects lined up as a visual. I think that'd be helpful. And that's it for me. So
we do need a motion on this.
we do not have. Yes, we do. Yes, we do.
Yeah, just to recommend approval.
All right, I'll accept a motion.
Second.
All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All against, say no. All right, motion has been approved. And that is our final agenda item. So at 11:10, I'm going to adjourn the meeting.
When's our next meeting?
Our next meeting is 1 month from today, right? And we're not going 2 months, we're going 1 month.
So it's May
7th? Okay.
Thank you. And then just real quick, staff, I'm sure, is paying attention to all these bills that were introduced, many of which I'm super excited about, just to be clear. But I know that it's causing lots of churn. So
I'm not excited about them. Some of them I am. All right.